This is part 3 of our 4-part series about why we Christians continue to wreck the conversation about women and preaching. And in this video, the primary reason we're going to discuss is just good old-fashioned, really bad logic. Now, clearly, I do not have enough time to discuss all of the bad logic that surrounds this issue, so I'm just going to pick my top 3 and we're going to dive in. Let's go. We have some pretty sketchy logic around the idea of gender in the church sometimes. So, for example, I just heard a man say that preaching is masculine. It's innately masculine. And his reason was because preaching takes courage and initiative, and it's a challenge, and men are willing to face challenges. And I agree, except for he's forgetting the fact that women can also be courageous and face challenges. I mean, women have done some pretty hard things throughout all of world history, if I'm right. Now, I do appreciate what I think was part of his heart, and just saying that masculinity at its best is protective, and it takes initiative, and it's courageous, and you do see that in preaching. But I would also say that femininity, stereotypically at its best, is gentle and nurturing, and it guides people, and it cares for people. And you also see that in preaching. You actually see Paul tell the church in Thessalonica that his ministry to them was like a nursing mother, and surely that came through in his preaching. So this is all I'm saying. We do need to realize that men and women are different. At a minimum, we mean this biologically, and then that also has a lot of stereotypical manifestations for emotionally. And then we also know that we have different roles to play spiritually. God has told us that. But when we exclusively tie something like courage to one gender and not the other, or when we exclusively tie a spiritual gift like teaching to one gender and not the other, now we've drawn the line too harshly, and we're not actually allowing men and women to reflect the fullness of the image of God, which is quite complex. So this is my point. Men and women are different, but a lot of the cultural ways that we make these distinctions are actually somewhat unbiblical. So when we're discussing gender and preaching, let's make sure that we use biblical definitions of masculinity and femininity, and then draw the line there. And sure, after doing that, if you think women can't preach, that's fine, but make sure that we draw those lines biblically, not just intuitively. Okay, this next one is an overinflated view of the office of pastor. Now, don't get me wrong. Every church needs pastors. Pastors are necessary. That said, I literally just heard a guy say that women should be allowed to be pastors, because if we're not allowing women to be pastors, that means that we're putting them on the bench and that they can't carry out the Great Commission, and that we're quenching the Spirit of God in them, which is basically saying that anyone who's not a pastor is spiritually on the bench, that they're not carrying out the Great Commission, and that they're not even fulfilling all the gifts that the Spirit has given to them. That is wrong. Look, just because you're not a pastor doesn't mean that you're on the bench. There are millions of ways to use your gifts in appropriate settings, and that goes for men and women. So if you think a woman can be a pastor, that's fine. Have your argument for it, but make sure it's not rooted in an overinflated view of the exclusive value of the pastor. Lastly is when people engage in argumentation without the proper time to do so. I recently heard a guy on a really short video say that women can't preach. Now, when he said can't, he didn't mean that women are not allowed to preach. He meant that women are incapable of executing the act of proclamation. And he simply didn't explain what he meant. He had no scripture to back up his findings. And I still don't know what he meant. Did he mean that women are incapable of monologuing for an hour? Surely he didn't mean that. I think we could all disprove that. Did he mean that a woman is intellectually incapable of exegeting or articulating her findings in a passage? Did he mean that women are emotionally incapable of heralding, proclaiming a message with conviction and compassion? Did he mean that women cannot call someone to action? I still don't know what he means, and that's my point, is that often we will make a statement and not explain what we mean by that statement. So I think a really good tip here is simply to define your terms. That's fine. If you think that women are incapable of preaching, but you also think that women are prohibited from teaching, now you need to explain why God would prohibit a woman from doing something that she's not even capable of doing in the first place. Also, if you think these things, that's fine, but you need to back it up with some scripture. So that's my point. Make sure anytime you are making one of these points that you have time enough to actually build your argument, to define your terms, and to support it with scripture, which means, basically speaking, we probably shouldn't be talking about this on Twitter. Just saying.